Good day guys, I'm Mini War Painter and welcome to the first video of painting Ahriman. We've got a lot to cover. I'll catch you after the intro. Before we begin, I just want to let you know that this tutorial is going to be broken down into two parts. The first part, which is this video, is going to be about painting the gold details, the cold blue steel effects on the blades, and the blue marble effect on top of the disc. The second part of this tutorial will be showing you how to paint the pink glowy OSL effect and the mysterious smoke underneath the disc. Access to this second tutorial video on the OSL effect and the smoke will be found on my Patreon account, which you can find a link in the description box below for all of you super duper keen painters out there. Now, let's get on with some painting. So if you're looking now, you'll see again what we'll achieve by the end of this tutorial. After painting my first Disk of Tzeentch, I knew I had to take this one further by adding in the OSL effect on top. The smoke underneath, however, the tones were chosen because of how I'd like to paint the mysterious smoke that's generated from Ahriman's left hand. Other than that, everything else was destined to be painted gold. So first things first, I based the majority of the model with Rhinox hide, due to it being dominated by gold. Rhinox hide is my go-to colour at the moment with gold, purely because of how well it ties in as a dark tone. I'll next move on to basing the outer steel blades with scale 75 black metal. I'd probably advise leaving this step until after the gold is completely painted, due to the amount of handling of the model by these details you'll naturally do to gain that stable painting platform, and rubbing off the paint as you do so. Then I'll base all the areas I want blue with Incubi darkness, making sure to tidy up any areas with Rhinox hide straight afterwards. Incubi darkness makes the perfect shaded tone when followed up with Thousand Suns blue, so there's no need to do a recess wash with Nuln Oil afterwards. Next, I'll layer all over the gold details on top of the disc with scale 75 Negro Gold, leaving Rhinox hide in all the recesses. Make sure you apply enough coats of paint to get a good strong coverage. If you don't and settle for a patchy finish, you'll have a very difficult time when you try to glaze in the highlights without it looking gash. So do it nice or do it twice. Afterwards, I'll use Negro Gold again to edge highlight all the details underneath the disc. Hardly any light exists under there in reality, so we can use this opportunity to create a contrast between the darker tones on the bottom and the reflective, brighter tones on the top. I'm now creating a glaze using a 1:1 mixture of Rhinox hide and Negro Gold. This will get used to build up to pure Negro Gold on these claws that you can see under the disc. Because they don't have an edge to highlight, we'll need to glaze in a gradual highlight as the surface will reflect light a little more smoothly than the hard edges surrounding it. With all those base coats completed, we're all set to move on to creating the reflective polish effect that gold naturally has. But before we get to that, I want you to note that I've painted the pink OSL effect on top of the disc at this stage, which you can learn how to do yourself over on Patreon. You'll find a link to get there in the description box below. So the first step to creating the shine effect on the gold is to mix a 1:1 ratio of Negro Gold and Kunzite Alchemy. And we're going to begin feathering this on in the shape of a sand timer, starting in the middle of the disc where the highlight will be the most narrowest, and getting wider as we push out towards the outside of the disc. After that, the next highlight is of Citrine Alchemy, which is applied in the same manner but reducing the angle of the sand timer shape, in order to leave some of the previous highlights showing. If you're struggling to make sense of this step because of the OSL effect being in the way, head over to my other tutorial on painting the Disk of Tzeentch, where you'll get a better demonstration of how this highlight is applied. Now we've established the highlights to the shine, next is to form some darker tones to help the highlights stand out. So with a 1-to-1 mix of Rhinox Hide and Negra Gold, I'll feather again in a sand timer shape, but 90 degrees off from the highlights. You could go over this section again to enforce the darker tones further, but I'm pretty satisfied with how it looks. Next, I'll edge highlight the rest of the gold trim around the rim of the disc with a 1-to-1 mix of Negra Gold and Kunzite Alchemy. I've been using these paints for the gold details of my Exalted Sorcerers for a long time, and I wouldn't dream of trying anything else. These gold paints are fantastic, and they really do give off an enchanted, wealthy appearance. To learn more about the Scale 75 gold paint set, check out the review I've done on them, which you can find on my channel. Next, I'll move on to a spot highlight of Citrine Alchemy, which I'll apply very sparingly to all the sharpest points that I edge highlighted earlier. When applying these spot highlights, remember that less is more. Get carried away with it and you risk compromising the balance of light on the model. With the golds now completed, I move on to painting the cold steel blades. It may be wise to give them a quick coat of black metal again, just to cover up any areas you may have rubbed off through handling the model. Once happy, I begin applying my first reflective highlight with Scale 75 Cobalt Alchemy. This colour has a nice blue hue to it, which really helps produce a nice cold finish to the steel, which in turn contrasts nicely against the warm gold details. This highlight is added to the outside of each point and in the centre of the curve to each blade, where a natural reflection will develop. After establishing where all my highlights will be, I then look to blend them in using black metal. This is used as a glaze to tint over between both tones, making sure one coat dries before the next, until you're happy with the smoothness of the transition. Notice the direction of the brush strokes as they're applied in the direction of the black metal base coat. This action is key to glazing, as it prevents the small puddle of black metal pigment that's left behind to dry unnaturally in the lighter section of the surface. Next, I take the highlights further with a 1-to-1 mix of Cobalt Alchemy and White Alchemy. This is added to the centre of the highlights in the curvature of the blades and towards the tips of each point. If you're light enough with the application of this highlight, you could get away without having to blend afterwards. The last thing to do now is apply final edge highlight with White Alchemy. Unlike the gold details, I'll be applying this highlight along all the edges of the blade. This will help amplify how sharp these blades are, as well as frame all the transitions I've developed with the other tones. That's the blades completed, and you can see we've got a really good reflective effect that contrasts nicely against the warm gold tones. Moving on to the blue tones, I wanted to do something different to the details on top, so I went for a kind of marble effect. I started things off with a thinned down 1-to-1 mixture of Incubi Darkness and Thousand Suns Blue. I then used this to freehand in some simple shapes that complemented the curvature of the Tzeentch emblem. I went over each shape a couple of times until I was satisfied with how intense each coat was. I then used pure Thousand Suns blue to go over each free-handed shape to create a smooth transition going through each tone. This is followed up by a glaze of pure Incubi Darkness. This is used to cover each blue section on the top of the disc to soften the appearance of the free-handed details painted earlier, making them somewhat of a silhouette. Once the glaze has dried, I'll go back to Thousand Suns blue to add a highlight along the centre of each free-handed shape. I then add a further edge highlight of Ahriman blue inside of the previous highlight I made with Thousand Suns blue. This is then followed by another glaze, using Thousand Suns blue. Again to soften the appearance of the highlights just applied. Then a fine highlight of Ahriman blue. And a final highlight of Baharov blue. This is applied like a spot highlight, so minimal application to prevent spoiling your hard efforts. Then to finish off the blue marble effect, I'll apply a coat of Lahmian medium to give the marble a consistent finish, which will also aid in tying in all the transitions we've just made. With the marble effect completed, I move on to the small blue details under the disc. This will be painted dark in tone as to represent the lack of light. So with Thousand Suns blue, I'll turn it into a glaze consistency and glaze downwards so that the pigment builds up at the lower part where light would stand a chance to catch. Then, once dried, I'll glaze in some Ahriman blue to add a highlight. When glazing, remember to add plenty of thin coats to get the desired coverage you're after. And make sure to allow one coat to dry before applying the next. I'll then base all the gems around the edge of the disc with Warpstone Glow. Normally I'll paint gems to appear black with small subtle transitions of green. But I want these green tones to stand out and become a strong spot colour for the model. I then highlight each gem with Cyberite green, building up my highlights from the centre of the gems. Then a final highlight of Ghost Blaster green. To finish each gem off is a coat of Lahmian medium. To paint the claws underneath the disc, I went with a base of a 1:1 mix of Rhinox hide and Zandri dust. Normally I'd base textures like these with Zandri dust, but because they're in a very dark area of the disc, I thought I'd add in some Rhinox hide to simulate this. Then it's an edge highlight of Zandri dust. When painting into fiddly areas like these, it's best to get just a small bit of paint on the end of your brush, so your focus isn't spread along the full length of the bristles, and just the tip. Finally, an edge highlight of Ushanti bone. With all those details completed, that's just about wraps this video up. If you wish to learn how I paint the mysterious smoke underneath the disc, click on the link in the description box below, which will take you to my Patreon account where you'll find tutorials on how to paint the pink OSL effect on the disc and the smoke underneath. Now I'll catch you at the end of the video. And that's a wrap. I really hope you found this tutorial helpful. The different textures on your models when you paint, reflective polished gold effects or blue coal steels, or if you give, a marble texture to something, it's details like these that make your models pop out that little bit more. So if you're really keen at painting your models and you want to improve or you want your army to look the best, take advantage of all these different textures. If something's reflective, make it look reflective. If something glows, make it glow. If something's old and tattered, make it appear old and tattered. Try and avoid just using flat colours and just simple layering and recess washing. Try and give more to your models than just that, and you'll go far. Just as a reminder, if you want to learn how I painted the pink OSL effect and the mysterious smoke underneath the disc, click on the link in the description box below, and that'll take you to my Patreon account where you'll find a huge range of tutorials, not just videos but PDF tutorials as well, where you'll get to see very crystal clear, detailed descriptions of how I build up all my transitions to all the effects that I try to achieve. You've got things that vary from capes to other types of cloths like loincloths and tabards. I've got tutorials on painting parchments and how to paint those fine lettering and glyphs to the artwork. There's loads more to be learnt over on my Patreon account. So even if you're just curious, just go over there and watch the intro video that I've got for you to see what you've got to look forward to should you wish to join me over there on Patreon. Thanks again for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. Don't be shy to mix those paints. Ta-ra.